let's kind of pivot to Virginia and ATA and what you've been doing with the Virginia Fix, or the Virginia Flight Information Exchange. So again, great show last year. We went over this in a very excruciating detail, but I know you created this in partnership with the Virginia Department of Aviation, the Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation, Virginia Department of Transportation. So can you explain to people what it is for those that don't know this Virginia Fix?
Sure. And so I think the short explanation is if you look at the FAA's concept of operations for UAS traffic management, or UTM, they have a box that's called the Supplemental Data Service Provider, or SDSP for short. And in Virginia, we had a conversation about 4 years ago, and the question was, what can Virginia do to help the industry, right? What can Virginia do to help the next phase of flight and help operators, help industry? And we realized that we have a lot of data here in the Commonwealth that's inside of state and local agencies and state and local government that we can provide to industry as a free public service. And so that's what Virginia Fix is. We call it an authoritative SDSP, and it's a free public service that's meant to help with safer, more effective flight, and then data sharing and some new stuff that we'll talk about today.
Well, I know we're going to dig deep into this, and what I want to do first, John, is roll a video where the Virginia Fix, we can see it in action. So, picture paints 1,000 words. Let's go ahead and roll that, and then we'll talk a little bit about it afterwards.
For coming for the first Shenandoah Apple Blossom Fly-In, where we're going to have a lot of fun showing what we do in our careers in aviation, and show what we're doing in aviation in the Commonwealth of Virginia and in Winchester, Virginia, and show some of the great stuff that America's doing to lead the world.
We are here today in beautiful downtown Winchester, Virginia, during their very historic and beautiful Apple Blossom Festival. And today what we're showing is how drones can be used for package delivery. We're working today with several partners, most notably with DroneUp and ATA Corporation, and we are actually delivering food items to the parade route below.
We'll take off here, fly about 1,500 feet down to the other end of the festival and deliver the package. Simulating what we do with other companies. I think drone delivery is a great start. We're going to need to figure out how to deliver more packages. It's just going to get more and more automated, and you'll see it expand further and further out, so that most of the country will be able to order something and have it delivered within 15
That was amazing. And I know, John, this was what they call the Apple Blossom Festival. Was it in Winchester, Virginia, which is where you're from or where you live?
It is my hometown. In fact, you can probably see my house off in the distance. Yeah, so we wanted to show the Fix in action. We wanted to show the value of these public digital services. We wanted to show the value of providing data sharing and safety data to the industry. And so, Tracy Tynan from VIPC was interviewed in that video. She helped make this happen. Dr. Amber Wilson and Greg Campbell from Department of Aviation supported it. And I think you saw DroneUp in there, right? So DroneUp's one of the partners that we're working with on the Fix. We'll talk a little later about it. There's a long list of really great industry partners that are working to help make this happen. But basically the idea was to say, look, if we can all share data, if we all have a common operating picture, that we can actually conduct a lot of drone flights in a very small area very safely. And so we actually ended up conducting about 40 flights in about a 1 square mile area over a 30,000 person festival crowd.
Wow.
And it was pretty amazing. And you know, I think that the signal achievement there was I was actually able to get fried chicken and ribs delivered by drone. As I told my friend, I can probably retire now since I've achieved my purpose in life.
There you go. Very cool. Well, so like at the heart of it then, what we're talking about is UAS traffic management. And you dropped a term earlier that for those that are maybe not fully initiated, may not understand. You mentioned this SDSP, Supplemental Data Service Provider. So let's walk it back a little bit, take it up to a higher level to fully appreciate what this Virginia fix is and what you guys are bringing to the fight here to enable drone technology and kind of widespread use, things like drone delivery. So explain how important SDSPs are to UTM.
And so I think, you know, the key to SDSPs is that they provide a lot of the services that you would otherwise get from the FAA if you're in conventional aviation, right? So things like weather. So Don Burkhoff at True Weather, everybody knows Don, you know, he's one of our partners, right? So we work with Don to both consume and provide weather, but we also provide weather sensor data to him. Information on things like surveillance. So where are the other vehicles, right? Where are the aircraft, where are the drones, and then, you know, information on what we call procedural deconfliction or configuration. So things like, hey, where's the sewage plant? Because you really don't want to land in that. Hey,
No, we really don't. That would be a shitty day, no pun intended.
Right? And you know, nearby you've got the water tower and the cell tower and the power lines, right? There've been a lot of stories about issues with power lines. And so being able to provide all of this, what are called the UAS service suppliers, right? So folks like Aloft and AirMap, they can consume this data and make that available to pilots so that they can have a safe, effective flight.
Right. So you use the term also UAS service supplier. So acronym world, that's USS. And all of this, John, right, is emanating from the FAA NASA ConOps for UTM, which I believe is in its version 2.0 right now.
Yes. And I think they're releasing version 3.0 very soon.
Okay. Oh, cool. I didn't know that. Fun fact, you just heard it here. 3.0 UTM ConOps coming out soon. Okay. So how does ATA then plug into this UTM framework?
So we are basically, I like to think of us as the plumber of UTM. Chris Kucera from One Sky, who I love, he thanked me for doing the crummy work of UTM, like the non-sexy part. So the way this works, right, is our model is to work with state and local and regional government to create these public data services, right? And so it's public data, it's free, it belongs to the public. But then our model is we plumb that, right? We do the plumbing so that there's an application programming interface, so a digital interface, so that the UAS service suppliers, right, who the FAA have kind of designated as the folks who are going to do the flight planning, the compliance, right, the kind of local level, making sure that the drones don't fly into each other, they can digitally consume all of this information and data, right, to make sure that not only do you not fly into your friend's drone, you don't fly into the water tower or land in the sewage plant, right? Or, hey, you know, today's actually pretty windy. You might want to consider, you know, flying later or using a different vehicle.
Yeah. So to kind of, you know, when I hear your plumbing analogy, I think you're kind of clearing the pipes, if you will, because, you know, when you think about data and all the information that's out there, even at the local level publicly, it's all in different places. And so I could imagine as a drone pilot, right, you're out there, you've got this app open for your weather. You've got this app open to get notifications of what's nearby. You might have some access to a separate map of the local area. And I think what I'm hearing you say, John, is that you've plumbed all these in a way that connects those pipes into one pipe so that that you can have a one-stop shop and open up and see all of these things at one time.
Yes, and our goal is to make sure that you see that in your ground control software, right, or your USS software. You know, I was telling someone at FAA a few weeks back, in the ultimate world, no one ever looks at the interface to my software. right? It just goes to, you know, your DJI control software. It goes to your before you fly. It goes to your aloft. It goes to your air map, right? And that's how you, to your point, you see it all in one place. Because, you know, regular, you know, conventional pilots don't look at 9 different screens when they're flying an aircraft.
Well, they've got a couple things, and we know they're looking at a few things, but yeah, the less the better. I mean, you know, everybody talks about multitasking, and some people think they're very good at it, but you know, NASA actually did a study on pilots, I think on astronauts, that showed, you know, humans can't actually multitask. They cannot actually do multiple things at one time well, but what they can do is rapidly task in a serial manner, you know, from one thing to another. And those are the people that can be very successful, right? But in your case, putting it all in a one-stop shop is ideal. Now, John, you're doing this through, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, this information hub you're calling AirDex. So tell us about AirDex.
You know, AirDex is our product name. Most people will never hear about it because, you know, each of these programs is called a flight information exchange. And so we really put the state or local program first, but AirDex is the software suite. And what that software
behind the
suite
scenes, John, it's behind the scenes. Okay, gotcha.
behind the scenes, right? You know, I could call it the, you know, the Intel inside, but that would, I think, be maybe flattering myself. Maybe someday, right? But the key there is that provides all of the input and output interfaces. So it's what allows us to consume the ADS-B data, which is a aircraft surveillance mechanism. It allows us to consume the radar data, the weather data. We've actually recently connected it to some public safety 911 dispatch systems. So,
Wow.
you know, you can, so you can start to see events in real time. But then it also has the outbound interfaces, right? The things that talk to the USSs, the things that use the ASTM UTM standard, right? Those things that, you know, more acronyms, right? But it's basically, it manages those ins and outs. It provides a governance framework, right? Because one of the things that's really important is that the public agency that publishes the data and owns the data has the ability to set, you know, rules and quality for the data, right? So people can say, look, you know, I'm fond of saying government data isn't always perfect, but at least it's official, right? And so every piece of data, right? Every piece of data in the system has an owner. And so that allows for this to be, you know, high quality public data. So yeah, that's kind of the thing inside that makes it all work.
Well, and I know that the fact that this is public data it's kind of a huge foot stomp for you, right? Like, in other words, ATA, you're not looking to plumb this data and own it. Like, this is all out there already in the public. You're just facilitating it to be useful in, you know, kind of one location for not only end users like drone pilots, but also government employees, public safety, as you said, right?
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, to use the public, the fire and police and emergency dispatch data, that those systems are already public systems. The data already belongs to the public. There just isn't a way for you to see that data in real time, right? And there's a whole bunch of like legal and procedural and privacy things you have to work out. I mean, you know, I laugh. I mean, because Chris, you know, I mentioned Chris was here. He's like, thank you for doing the crummy part of this work, right? But once you work all that out, right, now as a private pilot, I can see, okay, there's a response to a 4-alarm fire. This is where the fire is, right? You know, let's say I'm news media. I know where to fly, so I'm not interfering, right, and putting people's lives at risk. The public safety guys know. It's about making all of this stuff available that generally already exists.
Right. But you're connecting the dots. Now, you started this in Virginia, as we said earlier, and it's Virginia's first big step towards UTM. Launched that fix for Virginia Fix in August of 2020. I think you started with 9 agencies, if I recall correctly. 2 advisories in your first year. You grow to about over 40 agencies. And they posted about 1,000 advisories within that first year. How have you grown this past year in 2022?
So we're now at over 50 agencies in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Wow.
State, local, regional. That includes 150 named users. So these are individual administrators and account owners within those agencies. We've actually grown the number of advisories to, I think, over 23,000. And a lot of that is because of the systems and sensor integration, right? So we're getting data, real-time data that's live. On any given day, there are about 800 current advisories. So if you're flying in Virginia and you check the fix, or you go to before you fly and you check it there are about, on any given day, there are about 800 pieces of information that are relevant for safety. For example, we have Hampton Roads, right, which is a very busy airspace and community in Virginia. And I think we even have an image of that. And that Hampton Roads image, you can see there's multiple types of data in the system, right? So some of it is so you can see the blue stuff that comes from FAA, right? So that's your surface controlled airspace. It's your landscape maps, but then there's some orange stuff in here, right? So there are, ground rules. So in here, there's a reservoir that's not open to the public, right? So we let pilots know, hey, listen, this is not a place where you can take off or land. I mean, you can land there, you just won't be able to retrieve your vehicle because it's got a big chain link fence around it, right? Upper right-hand corner, there's a hazard because there's a large fuel terminal. Probably not a good idea to crash your, Media M300 into the gas tanks, right? In the middle, there's a circle that's a public safety incident. So I talked about integrating the CAD data, right? So we let people know police and fire are actively doing something here, right? Please don't interfere with this public safety operation.
And what's the supplemental rule one that's at the bottom?
That's a state forest. So you learn all these great things, right? So you can't take off or land in a state park at all, but you can take off or land in a state wildlife area or state forest if you give them notice. And so actually, if you go to the fix and you click on that one, it actually gives you the name and the email of where you send your email to say, I'm going to be flying on this day. And actually, you don't even have to get a response. As long as you send them notice, you're legal.
Well, I got to echo what Brett Feddersen said out there, by the way. He's in the chat, and he said Virginia Fix is a great program, a regional leader. He dropped a link to an article about it. So thanks for that, Brett. Thanks for coming to the show. Thanks for watching and supporting. I agree. So bottom line is, without the fix, none of this information would have been readily available, at least in a one-stop shop. I mean, especially the rules, John, like being an attorney, I kind of joked with other attorneys. It's like job security for attorneys that have a clue about this, because there's really, other than what you've done here, there's no real good place to find these local rules in an easy way. And to have something like this where I click on it and now I could send my email and get my permit. Holy shnikes. I mean, what a benefit to people. I mean, drone pilots, if you're out there listening, so you started in Virginia and you expanded beyond Virginia. This was a really big year for you guys. Tell us about it.
So we've got, I'm trying to be succinct here. So there's a lot. So we're working with Alaska. We're working with Alaska, both the state of Alaska, Alaska DOT, and the test site. In fact, Virginia and Alaska at the state level have signed a formal MOA to collaborate. So
Memorandum of Agreement. MOA is it? Yeah, Memorandum of Agreement.
All the acronyms, it's acronym. But so we'll be launching an Alaska fix in the first half of next year. We already have launched a Central Coast fix in California that actually went live just before Thanksgiving. So now we're working on all the stakeholder engagement to get all the data in. And just like we were talking about supplemental rules, the UC system and the CSU system, right, the large university systems, they have specific rules for when you use university property, right? But now you can find it, you can find the contact, you can find the form, right? You can get approval. So the Central Coast fix is live. We will be launching a fix in Northeast Ohio, probably spring of next year. That's already in the works. And then we're having active discussions in Southern New Jersey. Shout out to, Ray and Ron at Ultra. We're having a great time there. I mean, just wonderful communities, great people. I mentioned David Heath in Pennsylvania Drone. We're looking at setting up a Keystone fix in southwestern Pennsylvania to enable, medical services. And then I just, got back last week from Oklahoma, and some really fabulous discussions with the Aeronautics Commission, and with, Jamie Jacob at OSU and Daniel Plaisance in Tulsa. So it's just been an amazing year. And I will just say, I mean, that the people that I'm getting to work with make this job really, really fun. These are
oh my
great
gosh. John, all those names you just dropped, like I'm huge fans. And we actually just this week had Dr. Jamie Jacob on our leadership podcast, The Full Tilt. He, as you mentioned, with OSU's Unmanned Systems Research Institute at and working with the Tulsa Innovation Labs folks that you mentioned. So, so much going on. John, you got to come out to Colorado. We are having so many. Yeah, good, because next year, I mean, when you think about events in this industry, we've got Geo Week in February here in Denver. We've got AUVSI Exponential in Denver. I think Geo Int is in Denver, if I recall correctly, at some point. The list goes on and on. So hopefully I'll get to see you soon out here in Denver as well. Anyway, I want to kind of talk about, you mentioned these supplemental rules and laws are so important, and you were able to collaborate on the Virginia side, which I think was very significant for these other states as well, to get a law passed that kind of connects information to the Virginia fix in a very official legal way. Can you explain what that is?
I can, and I want to be very clear about all of this. So we were not involved in getting the law passed.
Okay.
The law was passed on its own, and I think it's very important for that, because in the industry we're very familiar with kind of the tug between the locality and the operator, right? And nobody wants drone bans and stupid rules, right? But on the same note, you can't go and tell a locality that they have no control, right, over what people do in their community. And so Delegate David Bulova from Fairfax put forth House Bill 742 at the beginning of 2020. I remember because it was just before the pandemic, basically authorizing localities in Virginia to regulate takeoff and landing on public property. But what then happened was a stroke of brilliance on the part of the Department of Aviation, and a lot of credit to Dr. Amber Wilson for running this process. Basically, DOAV promulgated the rules and worked with industry to say, okay, so the localities can regulate takeoff and landing on public property, but they have to follow the regulations through the Department of Aviation. Basically, it has to be in the fix. And if it's not filed through DOAV, it's not legally valid, right? And what this does for industry is, again, to your point, gives them a one-stop shop. It's super clear. DOAV can make sure people aren't saying, well, I'm going to, no landing for the entire county, right? That's not allowed, right? You can't use this park ever. That's not allowed, right? You have to have a good reason. It has to be safety reason. And so this is actually a great example of how Virginia was able to, do a King Solomon, right? And basically give the localities something that makes them happy in terms of being able to manage quality of life and safety, but also give industry very clear operating rules that are not onerous, right? And make sure people aren't doing, stupid local regulations. So
no, that's huge. And I was looking at my notes here, John. I can't find it. I'm so sorry. I don't remember the name, but I know AUVSI just launched like a state level kind of legislative effort called Drone something. Do you know what?
Drone Prepare, right? And
Drone Prepare. So everybody out there, yeah. So people that are like involved in Drone Prepare, listen carefully to what John is saying. Look at the Virginia House Bill 742. This makes an abundant amount of sense when you think about the information that is needed for safe flight, especially in low altitude at the local level, which is where it's going to happen. So, this effort that you've done, with the fix, and then of course with folks in the legislature, like taking that and running with it, attracted a lot of attention to you, John. You've like coalesced a lot of different partners this year. So tell us about that.
That's what
I know you've been out on the road like gumshoeing it for the past 12 months, but tell us about the partners that you've been able to gather this year.
It's been absolutely wonderful. And I already mentioned that we've been working with the Alaska Test Site, right? And that's their acronym is ACWASI, which stands for the Alaska Center for UAS Integration. Wonderful people. Kathy Cahill, Nick Adkins, Jimmy Parrish. I mean, these people are like, I love them, right? And then we've been doing a lot of work with Virginia Tech and MAP, the Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership. Tombo Jones is a fabulous leader. We're really lucky to have him here in the And so that's on the test site side, and then on the USS side, we've got a number of different USSs we've been working with, but they're really kind of 3.5 that have really stood out in terms of their engagement. And one obviously is Aloft, right? John and Brad have been great. We're feeding data into before you fly, and we're looking at ways to bring data back in, and they're really committed to data sharing. Another company is OneSky, right? Great, super sharp folks. I actually saw Mike Tornetta last night. They were another winner of the Ellie Award. So, but they bring a lot of value, right? They really understand airspace management. And then the 1.5 is AirMap and DroneUp, right? Because they have a bunch of different software tools. They have dashboards, right? They're a USS. They're also an operator. And DroneUp's just been a wonderful partner, right? Because because of where they sit, they understand the totality of the universe, right? And so they're providing input into the services and the data from the perspective of a major operator. They also have the perspective of a USS and a consumer, right? So they've been there. There's an amazing partner. In addition, I already mentioned DroneUp on the operator side. We're starting to do some work with X-Wing out west because of some projects related to the test site and whatnot, and they're really, really sharp folks. And it also, for me, that's important because I'm fond of saying, AAM is really a continuum. And people tend to say AAM and they kind of immediately go to eVTOL, but it's really a continuum, right? And so you need the X-Wings and the DroneUps and the Jobies all in the room for this if it's going to work. On the sensor side, we've been doing a lot of different sensor integrations, and I'll just talk about a few that people. There's private discussions, but we've been working with Echodyne, we've been working with Pierce Aerospace, we've been working with Iris, we've been working with Fordham, we've been working with Breeze, N5, and IntelliSense, and on the weather side. So just and I mentioned Don, right? I mean, Don knows weather better than anybody.
Yes.
Right. And so this universe of partners, and we're always looking for more, right, is amazing because we're really able to move a lot of data around between the different participants.
John, before we talk about UTM, the affordable and sustainable UTM ecosystem, as you called it, that you're creating with these partners, and I know we'll have an image of that to kind of walk through. I want to highlight something that we haven't mentioned yet. So not only do you have air decks in the background and these fixes that you're creating, but ATA also in and of itself acts as a USS. Is that correct? Separately and apart?
So we are a USS, but I want to be really clear about that. So we don't market our USS tools. We're a USS because if you look at the standard, there's a role called a constraint provider or constraint manager. So we're a USS. We have a Lance USS onboarding. But we use that for R&D and for the ability to connect to FAA systems and to be able to provide these public data services. So this is very important because we are not interested in providing operator-facing tools, right? We would much rather partner with Aloft and OneSky and AirMap than compete with them. And so while we are a USS, the way that we're not focused on providing end user operator tools.
Gotcha. Okay, just to clarify that, because I knew you had that authority, if you will, as a USS, and now I understand it feeds into not only what you're doing with the fix, but also with these other partnerships with the other USSs. So it makes a lot of sense. I want to pivot for a second, John, and pop up this slide. I believe it's Winchester. Tell us, walk us through, how this kind of illustrates the UTM that you're creating that is affordable and sustainable.
Sure. And so, the idea here is we in Virginia, we've been kicking around this concept that's gotten a lot of good traction with some of these other partners that we're calling minimum viable infrastructure, right? And so, we're still trying to figure out what this world looks like, right? And we're still trying to figure out what you need to make this stuff viable. So we've come up with this concept called minimum viable infrastructure, and it's based on the idea that you only build what you need for the risk level. So the image that we're seeing in Winchester, and my apologies because there's a lot of stuff in this, right? But right in the middle near the pinpoint, you can see an icon of a little tower. So that's a micro weather cell. That's actually provided by the city of Winchester for free as a public digital service. So we basically hooked up, the city has a Davis that sits on top of the Emergency Operations Center. We've hooked it into the fix, live real-time weather data. right? And then down by the airport, you might see a little tiny icon of a blue plane. So we've also plugged into the ops management and the ADS-B sensors at the local general aviation airport, and we're pulling that data into the fix and providing real-time awareness on crewed, right, traditional aviation, because what's interesting about that airport is you can't really see it from the map, but kind of across the highway is a large FBI facility. There's a very large construction project going where they've got drones for site survey. And so, providing this kind of real-time data is really helping make the airspace safer, make it easier to fly. And it's really anchored around this minimum viable infrastructure concept, because the data services that I'm showing you right now, they're using existing systems, right? We didn't go out and buy a bunch of new stuff. And you're definitely, at some point we're looking at maybe putting an Echodyne in Winchester. We actually were able to experiment with one at the Apple Blossom Fly, and it was great, right? But so that, the ability to provide these services and rely as much as possible on existing infrastructure, it keeps the costs low, right? And that makes it affordable for states and localities.
Well, yeah, you had kind of alluded to this a little bit, the idea that it's risk-based, what you're doing, kind of this minimum viable infrastructure, but also performance-based a little bit. So I think we have a slide from that Apple Blossom Festival that maybe you can walk us through some of this as well.
I think this kind of gets into a little bit of how you make this stuff real, right? And so the purpose, I mentioned earlier of the fly-in was to roll the clock forward a couple of years and say, well, what does it look like, right? You've got public safety operations, we've got hobbyist operations, we've got commercial operations. So the first thing I'll draw your attention to is there are a bunch of little orange boxes, right? Those are all the ground rules and hazards, right? The regional jail, et cetera. So then the red boxes, right? What are those? So those are basically public notice provided by the town that provide information to pilots that this is an open air assembly as described under the FAA's operations over people rule. Right? Okay. We're all familiar with this, right?
Yeah.
What constitutes operations over people? And the short answer is, I'm not really sure, right? Yeah. And the FAA will tell you they deliberately left it vague, so there's room for discussion, right? But then operators will tell you, well, I don't know what the answer is. So the town said, look, it's a big festival. It's operations over people, right? But then you can see little boxes in there. There's a green one, there's a yellow one, there's some red ones, where we basically carved out space inside the festival because these are areas that were, private parking lots, public safety buildings, fenced off areas. And we, the Commonwealth of Virginia and the city of Winchester, certified that there are no people there. So you can fly there. Okay. So that's where we had our 7 different teams flying. The green area is where we did our demonstration of commercial 107 delivery with DroneUp, where we delivered the barbecue, right? The yellow was a corral for the local AMA chapter, the Plane Crazy Club, right? Because the hobbyists are part of this industry too, right? Yeah. They're part of the industry too. And then the other red boxes, those are where all the public safety teams were flying to provide event overwatch. And so, so we basically, in addition to providing that configuration, we also provided live real-time feeds. So we used the Echodyne to let all of the operators know where the other drones were. We had 2 non-participating drones, people who didn't get the message and flew anyway, but we were able to manage that and keep, safe distance, right? And then that live ADS-B feed, which is interesting because the airport put in a NOTAM, and most of the conventional traffic stayed away. But we did have one pilot who came a little close in, but because of the ADS-B data, everybody saw it and they moved their vehicles down and we maintained safety. So wow. It was a wonderful event. And for me, a really great glimpse of what the future might be.
Now, are you going to repeat this like next year in 2023 with the Apple Blossom or somewhere else?
Yep, May 6th and 7th, 2023, we're going to do this again.
May 6th and 7th. Wow, that's right before AUVSI Exponential. So better hop on your plane there and get to my Law Tech Connect workshop on the 8th, my friend. We can talk about that later. But so speaking of next year, like what can we expect from you next year? You mentioned so many kind of partnerships that are underway. California's already live. I think you mentioned Ohio, Jersey, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, maybe Colorado. I just threw that in there. What are we looking at next year, John?
As I mentioned, we're going to have a bunch of flight information exchanges going on, right? Alaska, Northeast Ohio, Southwest Pennsylvania, Southern New Jersey, Oklahoma. We're also going to be integrating new sensor types, and we're going to have some really neat projects, specifically in the ones that are already in the works are in Virginia and Pennsylvania and Alaska, to roll out this type of infrastructure that we demonstrated in Winchester, right? This sort of affordable real-time microweather and surveillance data. So I think, and we've got a number of other really neat things that we're working on that I can't necessarily talk about because I have to respect people's confidence. But
Right,
you know,
right.
what's the old adage? You know, watch this space.
Yeah, well, I'm watching. Clearly, I think everybody out there is watching, and if they didn't know about you before, they do know about you now, John. And you know, I can't even imagine as we end this year, like how many days on the road you had, like just gathering this data and forging these alliances.
It's actually wonderful. I mean, I really enjoy it. I mean, I think I've been, I probably logged like 20 or 30,000 miles this year, and I probably know more local planning commissions, police chiefs, fire chiefs, than I ever thought possible. But I will say it's been really fun because I've gotten to see the USA in my Chevrolet.
Wow, USA, my Chevrolet. Well, you know, and the biggest challenge that you're really overcoming, because it takes someone like you to do this, John, is the fact that every state is different. Every locality is different. You know, people always talk about that patchwork quilt, but you're tackling that by going out there, meeting with these people, trying to understand, because not only are their rules different, but their authorities, the people, like you, because I remember when you and I had talked before, California as an example, it's the university system that has a lot of this data, as opposed to like maybe a Department of Transportation or Department of Aeronautics or something in a different state, you know? So just figuring that out alone, and the belly button, I imagine, was difficult.
It is. I mean, the public safety laws in California are subtly different than Virginia. You know, how the Caltrans system is managed. It's, you know, it's similar, but it's different, right? And so you have to subtly translate from one region to the other while also trying to make sure that what you're publishing to operators is consistent. So, right, so that a UAS operator can go from Virginia to California, and while it may be subtly different, they know what this is. They know it's a hazard. They know it's a supplemental rule. They know it's a public safety incident.
Right, right. So almost like maybe analogous to your minimal viable infrastructure concept, it's almost like this minimal viable compliance set. You know, where there are certain things that it doesn't matter where you are that people should just be aware of, and probably local rules are one of those, and probably critical infrastructure hazards on the ground are another one. So I'm sure you're writing this rule book as you go.
I'm helping and facilitating state and local officials to write
Yeah,
it, because they're
that's
the
a good
experts,
answer.
right?
That is a great answer, actually, because you don't have the time to write everybody's rules, but to kind of give
Yeah,
them
I'm the right guy.
the framework, you've given them the framework, John.
Yes, and helping convene the stakeholders, because for each of these, it's about getting the stakeholders in the room. Like that Winchester configuration for the fly-in.
Yeah.
I mean, there were multiple days where the police, fire, the local airport authority were literally physically walking around the town, pointing at stuff, saying, "Is it safe to fly there? Is it safe to land there? Right? What's a hazard there?" And literally negotiating how this gets laid out.
Yeah, yeah, that's huge. So anyway, a great year for you. You've got your Ellie. Show us again. I love that. So what do you know what the symbol looks like?
It's an E. It's an E. It's a cursive E for Elevate,
Oh,
Pennsylvania.
and Ellie stands for what?
Elevate.
Elevator word. Okay, very
Elevate,
cool.
Elevate, Pennsylvania, right? So
Okay.
it's about making sure that this industry is successful in Pennsylvania and we get these drones into the sky.
Well, I love that. And we are like just a couple minutes out from our time together here, John, from the close of our time. So very important. How do people plug into your efforts? Because I know they're going to want to.
Yep. So I think there's a couple different ways. One is uas.ata-llc.com is our aviation, microsite. The other is virginiafix.com. is the location for the Virginia fix. The Central Coast is cc-fix.com. And you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you need to get a hold of my email or phone number, I think it's probably pretty easy to find. But you know, I will just tell you, if you don't hear back from me right away, I'm pretty busy, but please do ping me. I don't mind.
No, that's great. And are there any upcoming shows where people might bump into you live, John, coming up?
I'll definitely be at AUVSI next year. I will be. I will be in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, in January. I'll probably be back out in California in February, probably in the Santa Cruz, Monterey region. I will be at the Virginia Aviation Business Association Aviation Day, which I think is the third week in January. So, I've got a bunch of stuff coming up, but I have to pull my calendar to get all of it.
No, I get that. And by the way, John, this show is about connections, and Brett Feddersen is out there telling you he's happy to support your Southwest Pennsylvania efforts. That's his hometown.
Awesome.
And thank you for taking the time to talk about this. And again, I echo Brett's comments. Thank you so much. I mean, it was fun talking to you initially, just learning about what you were doing, and just to have seen I would call it exponential growth over the past year. What you've been able to accomplish, Ellie aside, has been just absolutely amazing. So good on you. Happy holidays, my friend. And I know you're going to have a spectacular new year. We're looking forward to seeing you in 2023. And yeah, so that's all she wrote, everybody. We are out here.